So we have been in a month-long series that we're concluding today based on this classic book written in the late 1800s, first as a series of lessons that appeared in New Thought magazine, which became Unity magazine, and they're called Lessons in Truth. They were assembled together and put into this book. A lot of great pearls of wisdom still in here. Now, it was written a long time ago, and we've discovered a lot since then, but many still consider this a powerful classic. And today we want to bring it all together as we talk about divinity in expression. You know, like, what good is it to be the light of the world if you don't know it and if you're not showing up as it? Amen? And how many of you would say that our world could use a little more light? How many of you would say that our country could use a little more light? Our state? Your home? Inside your head? Let's make it personal. We know that we're created to be that. And so we want to talk about the importance of knowing your spiritual foundation, the importance of knowing your capacity and capability as a spiritual human being, and the impact and the effect that you are having, whether you know it or not. Your foundation, your capacity, your effect. When I was beginning to think about this, I was reminded back in time in the 1990s, I went to Unity Village for the first time. Now, Unity has a headquarters. It's about 20 miles or a little less outside of Kansas City in a town called Lee Summit, Missouri. And there literally is an incorporated village, 1,400-ish acres, that people can go and study, and it's where this movement was founded. And so early in the 90s, I wanted to go visit and learn more about Unity. And if you go, you can sign up for a tour because there's a lot going on there. And so I signed up for a tour. I was there to take some classes, but I was on a tour on a Saturday with a bunch of people, and we were walking around, and we made our way into the Silent Unity Prayer Building. It's where people are there right now praying with individuals. People have been there praying for over 135 years. Not the same people, but different people. Just seeing if you're listening. Somebody's there praying. And so as we were walking through, they stopped us as part of the tour, and we saw this picture on the wall. Would you give me that PowerPoint? And they said, now this is May Rowland. If you know the history of Unity, you're going to want to know this name because she was the longest serving worker and director at Unity Village. She worked there from 1916 to 1971 for 55 years. She started working there not long after she got out of high school because the Fillmores were then in their 60s, and they wanted someone to assist them, but not only to assist, to really learn and take over this powerful prayer movement, and they chose May Rowland. She began as a young woman. And as she began and started working in that particular time, people wrote letters in. They'd write letters about the crisis in their life. Letters were coming in from all over. And Silent Unity's business was to respond to every one of those letters. And so she was learning and responding, but every time a difficult letter came along, she would go straight into Mr. Charles Fillmore's office with that letter and say, Mr. Fillmore, this person said blah, 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 blah. What in the world can I write back? And he worked with her for weeks and months and maybe a year or two. He kept helping her and working with her and praying with her. And finally the day came, she walked in and said, Mr. Fillmore, you got to look at this letter. This is tough. What in the world would we write in this? And he said, May, the same Christ Spirit that operates in me operates in you. It's time for you to learn to use it. And he said that it really helped her realize, you know what? If what I'm believing is true, then I have those same capabilities and capacities. And so she began to grow in her faith and in her work. The classic story, what May Rowland is really known for, is several years later, Kansas City Unity Village is in Tornado Alley. And one night, during the middle of the night, the sirens went off, and everybody got up, and they ran to May and said, what are we going to do? The tornadoes have been touching down. They're coming through. And May Rowland got on her clothes and she walked outside in the pouring rain to the edge of the property line. And she spoke to that tornado and said, "Don't come here. Don't come here. Don't come here." And as the story goes, and it's documented, there were touchdowns, but it went all around that 1,400 acres and never touched down anywhere there. So when they told us that story, we all were like, wow. And one person said, "Is that really true?" And they said, "Absolutely, it's true." And the second person said, "Well, do we know what she prayed? Does anybody have a copy of that prayer that she prayed?" And the tour guide to me was just so brilliant. The tour guide said, "That's a great question. But perhaps the better question to ask ourselves is, do we know what she knew? Do we know what she was in touch with, what she believed, and what she knew that would cause a woman to get up in the middle of the night, go out in the rain, and even believe she could impact anything by speaking to a tornado?" And I never forgot that. I thought, that's what I want. I want to know what she knew. When people ask me if you could talk to anybody in the world, who would it be? It's easy for me. It's Jesus, because I want to know what he knew. You see, it's those great spiritual leaders. I want to know what they knew. This whole book, Lessons in Truth, is helping us to know those things for ourselves so that we're not dependent on going to somebody else or even an outside God. We're going to talk about a little bit more today. But we're learning to discover the God presence in which we live and move and have our being. We're learning to discover the potential of our soul and what it is that we can do if we develop and actualize this potential. And so it begins with our doing some work. In order to be a truly beneficial presence in the world, it takes some work. How many of you have worked on yourself? Everybody in here has worked on their self. If you're in a relationship for very long, you've definitely worked on yourself. We work on ourselves. As Rev Megan read earlier, Carolyn May said, "There's something about the power of the soul and of our consciousness that gives us the authority to influence the quality and direction of our lives. We're not just imagining it, but we're tasked to discover it, to co-create with it, to bring it into expression every day." And how do we do it? With our consciousness, our awareness, our thoughts, and our beliefs. With our intentions, with our words, with our actions. We do it in the way that we show up and in the way that we be. And so let's look at these three aspects of our being today for just a few minutes that hopefully will give you some tangible ways and practices to make this perhaps more real in your life. And the first is our foundation. There's something about a foundation. A foundation is absolutely essential. The foundation of this building, a foundation of your home, a foundation of an organization, a foundation of a relationship. That if the foundation is not solid, whatever kind of structure it's trying to hold is not going to withstand anything, right? The foundation determines and really influences the shape of everything. I had a powerful personal experience of that many years ago. I told a few of you a couple of weeks ago. Many years ago now, when my niece and nephews were smaller, I was at home for Christmas Eve. And my sister and my mom decided they needed to go do some last-minute shopping, and I was left with the three kids, which I love because I'm the best aunt. And so I thought, we're going to have fun together. Well, I had bought a gingerbread house kit and was looking forward to doing that with them. So it's just me and the kids, and I've got my youngest nephew, who was probably 5, my niece, who's 6, and then my older nephew, who was like 8 or 9. He was a little too old to get hands-on involved. He was just going to advise us from the sideline. And so my little Mallory and Asher, the two, we opened up. If you've ever put together a gingerbread house, it's full of all these big graham cracker-looking things and jellies and just gorgeous food. So we spread it all out to get started, and my youngest nephew said, Aunt Darlene, can I eat one piece? Well, I'm the best aunt. What do you think I said? Sure, baby. you can eat one piece before we get started. And so then my little niece said, well, can I eat a piece? I said, sure, you can eat a piece. So she picks up a little jelly bean and eats it. And my nephew picked up the biggest thing and started eating it, which, as it turns out, was the foundation. My older nephew said, Aunt Darlene, that's not a good idea. He is eating the foundation. And I said, it's all right. I told him he could have it. And by then it was not worth, he was eating the foundation. And so we began to look, and I thought, well, I do have to have a foundation. So I know my mom has graham crackers in the closet. So I'll pull some out, and what better than peanut butter? So we took peanut butter and graham crackers and smushed together just the right size. And then we started building. And every time we would try to put the top on, the bottom would slide out, and it would go like that. So we put more peanut butter. I think we even added jelly at one point. We just really were trying to, toothpaste was suggested. I said, no, we're not going that far. We can get this thing together. But every time we'd try to build on it, it would just come apart. And my nephew, Gavin, who was standing there, said, Aunt Darlene, pretending you have a foundation is never a substitute for really having a foundation. Yeah, right. I'm like, whoa. And it was at a time in my life when I was needing to examine my foundation. Now, to continue the story, we made the first ever, most ugly gingerbread teepee you could imagine. There are more than one way to go about this. So we had a great time, but I have never, to this day, years later, I'm telling you those words, pretending you have a foundation is never a substitute for having a real foundation. Now, the truth of our being is this. We all have a real foundation that is the real deal that will withstand whatever. It's your spirit. It's the truth of who you are. And yet, it exists in spirit. And it must come to exist for you in consciousness. You see, the things that exist in spirit must also come to exist for you in your truth, in your reality. And so even though we have a foundation that is perfect, that will withstand anything, we don't come into this world knowing it, or most people don't remember it very long. And so we go through life and we try to build our life on something else. We try to build it on being perfect. We try to build it on outsmarting or being defensive. We try to build it on anything, and yet if it is not built on the I am that I am, the Spirit, the truth of us, the part of us that has been here from everlasting to everlasting, to build it on our true spiritual nature, if it's not built on that, there's going to come times when it starts slipping and sliding and cracks. And I've learned in my life when that happens, it really is a gift, because what it is showing us, it's like, I'm ready to live into some of the truth of my being in a new way. I'm ready to let some of that go. So the first part of our knowing who we are and creating this life is investing some time in prayer and meditation and study and gathering together in community and really investing ourselves in coming to know the truth of our being. When Charles Fillmore talked to May Rowland, he used a term. He said, May, the same Christ mind that I'm using to access, you have access to that. Learn to use it. The Apostle Paul said something very similar, that the same mind that was in Christ is in you. And so what is that? What are we talking about when we use that term? And again, it's just a term. But what we're saying is to know that you have access to the Christ mind is that it represents a state of at-one-ment, enlightenment. It's the consciousness that knows it is one with the source in all creation. It's when we can transcend our ego identification or any of the roles as our identification, and we know our spirit as our deeper self. And the concept is not exclusively Christian. It's recognized as the divine presence that was fully expressed in Jesus. He told us that we were to express that too, and to do those things, and he added, and even greater, clearly meaning it didn't stop with him. And so we can understand that what we call the Christ mind is a universal state of consciousness, state of being that transcends any one religious or spiritual tradition. Sometimes it's called the universal mind. Some people call it the Buddha mind, the awakened mind, the divine mind. But it represents the highest potential of human consciousness. And what it is, it's when we know that we know that we know that we are a spiritual being having this human experience, and we are connected to so much more that you see at the surface. And so knowing that and taking that on is what begins to help us establish our foundation. And so then from there, our capacity begins to demonstrate what we believe we can do. There's a passage in the scriptures where it's one of the most popular stories ever told. How many of you have heard the story from the Bible of Jesus feeding the 5,000 plus with the loaves of fishes? It's a popular story. As the story goes, Jesus was kind of at the height of his teaching and people were following. And so the story said that that day he was out teaching people and over 5,000 men plus women plus children were there as he was teaching. And as it began to get late in the day, the disciples must have been getting hungry because they caught Jesus at just a moment and said, "Hey, it's getting late and we don't have anything to feed them. We should probably send them back home." And Jesus looked at them and he said, "Do something about it. You do something about it." And they probably went back together and said, "Is he suffering from heat stroke? I mean, this is like thousands of people. There's no way in the world we can provide food for these people. How could he possibly say for us, you do something?" It doesn't even make any sense. They didn't want to give up, and so they looked around and they found a little boy and they said, "Hey, do you have any food?" And he had a little piece of fish and a couple of little pieces of bread. And they said, "Can we have this? We'll bring it right back, but can we have this?" And they said, "Okay, we tried, but look, this is all we got. This is not even going to feed us." Now, I'm paraphrasing just a little bit. But this is the story. It's like, this is not even going to feed us. Like, look at this multitude. Now, all of this is really important because what the story is about is our capacity and our inner resourcefulness and how prayer and manifestation usually works. And so what Jesus did is he said, tell them to settle down in groups. Collect yourself and settle down. Collect yourself and settle down. And now tell them that it's time to eat and let them share what they have. Now, you know those people didn't travel that far without planning. And so as they began to sit down together, this person pulled out their little bit and this person pulled out that and this person. And as they begin to experience one of the first potlucks on earth, they just begin to pull stuff out. As the story goes, when they finished, they were able to collect surplus. They had so much left. Now, the story is so powerful because so often in our lives, in this story, what many people would love to have happened when they said, feed the people, if Jesus said, Father in heaven, rain down manna that they may eat. And if bread had a fell from heaven and people started eating, people would have been blown away. They would have been further drawn to Jesus, right? And they really wanted to know that God that he was praying to. Jesus knew that that's not the ultimate way that we grow here. It's one thing for God to answer a prayer, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen because it does. But our whole purpose is to discover our potential and the resourcefulness within us. So which is more powerful, that it gets rained down from heaven or that those people today and those disciples realize, wow, if we get clear about what needs to happen and everybody begins to share what they have, we had more than enough to meet the need. We could do something about it. I personally experienced that in a very specific way. A few ministries ago, when I was called to go to Maui, Hawaii, I told the story at the beginning of the series where I felt clearly called to apply to be the minister of unity of Maui, but so did a whole bunch of other people. And I felt clearly called, but then you feel like, well, I just don't know if this is going to work out. And it reached a point, I was coming down to one of the final candidates, and I was going to need to go and visit and see if this was going to work out. And so what I did, I took a bunch of index cards, and I just sat by myself, and I thought, what is standing between me and this? What is holding me back? And I began to write down things like, it's too good to be true. I wrote down, it's really far away from my parents who are aging. I wrote down, it's incredibly expensive. I wrote down, I love where I am. What if I don't like it? I had a whole stack of things that were rambling around inside of me, keeping one foot in and one foot out. You know the feeling? If I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. Que sera, the universe will figure it out for me. And so during that, I took each one of those cards every night and I read it. For example, this is too good to be true. And I read it and I kind of felt it in my body. I'm like, you know what? I had a lot of disappointments as a kid. I've had a lot of disappointments. I've had to dial back my joy at times in my life. And that was okay at that point in time, but I don't need to dial back my joy anymore. I'm not at that stage in my life. I am worthy of great things, of incredible things. And I began to write down other truths, higher truths that I believed until I could throw it in the fireplace. And so everyone finally got thrown in the fireplace. And the last one to go is I wanted an inexpensive place to stay. I'm asking, that was a huge thing. Well, guess what? The board president of Unity of Maui called and said, our attorney has an ohana, which is a guest house, and he is looking for someone to stay in it in an exchange for doing this, which was really simple. And he said it would be free. I'm like, what? You said it's like a beautiful, he said, I'll send you pictures. It was gorgeous. I'm like, let me get this right. You're saying I could stay free and I get to help with some yard work and we're good. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I could work that out. So I get the contract, I sign it, it's a done deal. All my stuff is packed, it's shipped, it is on the Pacific Ocean, headed now to Hawaii. Less than 10 days before I'm supposed to go, I get a phone call, and it's that man who happened to be an attorney. And he said, Darlene, I'm just going to get right to it. I don't know how to say it other than to tell you my wife and I just separated, and the ohana where you were going to be living, I'm moving in it this weekend because we need to raise our son together, and so I can't give you that place. And I said, gosh, I'm so sorry to hear about that, but we did have a written contract. And he said, yeah, but I am an attorney, and there's a clause in there. And even if he didn't, it's like, gosh, I hate you've gone through this. So I get off the phone. I don't even have my furniture, anything left, because it's already on the Pacific Ocean. Talk about not being able to turn back. But what went through me, I thought, have I made a mistake? Now here's where the learning comes in. Just because, this happened and now it got undone, so what's wrong here? Have I made a mistake? I spent 2 or 3 days in deep prayer and fasting and meditation, and one morning I heard clearly in my prayer time, Darlene, you needed that in order to take your next step. You do not need it to fulfill your destiny. And what I learned, you see, so often when we pray, it's like I wanted a miracle to happen. I wanted God to line it up. I wanted this undeniable thing to happen. But this is what happened in the process. I got online and I was able to find a place. It was in Paia. I could walk to the beach every day. I could walk to a Zen monastery every day. Now, it was so expensive, it literally took 50% of my income just for the rent. I was not comfortable with that. Didn't mean I could do it, but I was not comfortable with it. So I'm realizing, boy, this is getting me out of my comfort zone. But that same voice said, Why do you think the only source of income you may have is just through the church? So what began to happen in me, I realized I needed to open myself up to resourcefulness. I needed to open myself and to realize there's more ways for this to be accomplished. And it brought greater clarity. I said, I am going because I am called to go. And I am going because my soul says this is where I need to be. And I am walking in faith and in logic because they do go hand in hand. Very often you need them both. I'm making the best decisions I can. And what began to happen is things opened up and I did fabulous. And I learned through that experience that, perhaps if all of these miracles had have kept happening, maybe I would have never even been here, because I would have never come to discover that what spiritual growth is often about is it's time for you to discover what you're made of. It's time for you to discover your potential within. It's time for you to know that you can overcome, you can transcend, you can heal, you can learn new ways of being. It's about cultivating rather than expecting an outside presence to always move mountains for us. It's about cultivating the God presence and connection from within that helps us create a presence that is greater than any mountain without. Is that speaking to you today? Does that make sense? So we're investing in our foundation, and we're investing in our capacity, that we each have the capacity to become. You have the capacity to learn, to be guided, to become more generous, more abundant, to become more creative, to become more courageous, to become more at peace, to become more useful in a way that you can do like no other can do. That as long as we have skin on, we are in the process of becoming. And so it's our foundation, it's our capacity, and finally it is your effect or your impact. Sarah, would you give me that song? So often I think we also wait for just the right opportunity to shine our light. Or we tend to think it's only in this arena, in a spiritual arena, where growth happens or where my highest self can show up. Well, it's time for us to let go of those illusions, because that's an illusion. You are you, your presence is your presence, and it's needed wherever we go. And that for each of us to be able to not minimize or downplay or disregard your effect and your impact. I want to close with another true story about this young man and this woman. This lady's name is Barbara Glanz. She's a speaker and an author. And a few years ago, she spoke at a convention for a large grocery store chain. Over 3,000 people attended. And about a month later, she got a call from a young man who introduced himself as Johnny. And he said, Barbara, I heard you say that everybody in our store is here to make a difference. And he said, but I have Down syndrome and I'm just a bagger. But you said everybody could make a difference. And so I thought, how can I make a difference? You told us to think about the things that we loved. And one thing I love are sayings. And so I told my dad, I'm going to think up a saying every day, and he's going to help me print it out, and we're going to cut little slips of paper. And every time I bag somebody's groceries, I want to just drop one of those sayings in it. He said, Barbara, do you think that's a good idea? She said, I think that's a great idea. Well, a few weeks later, Barbara gets another call. This time it's from the store manager. Barbara, you're not going to believe what's happened at our store. I don't know what you said to Johnny, but his line is always 3 times longer than the other lines. She said, I went back to the end of his line multiple times and told people we had other registers open, they could move, and none of them would move. One lady said, I used to come once a week, now I come 3 times just to see Johnny's face and just to get his saying for the day. So the next day, I rounded up my whole team in the store and told them what Johnny had done. And I challenged them to think that way. Well, what began to happen is the lady in the floral department took the flowers she used to throw away, and she just cut them down to small ones and would walk around and hand them to people. The meat department guy loves Snoopy, so we now have Snoopy stickers all over all of our meat in that area. In fact, everybody in our store is having fun. There's a spirit of joy in people showing up. And he said, we've never experienced it, anything like it. And he said, and the reason this happened is Johnny believed and decided to do something about it. Our foundation, our capacity, and it doesn't have to be so grandiose that you'll never get around to it. Do something every day because you're making an impact whether you realize it or not. And so if you will realize it, intend it, and direct it, there's enough people in this room that can set this whole community on fire. You're already doing it. People are showing up saying, I don't know what's going on at that church, but they seem unusually happy. I want to see if that's real, that they're involved. I'll tell you a story next week. We're getting ready to we're clearing some land and putting in an interfaith or a peace prayer bridge for interfaith. We've already had another community, another business that wants to remain anonymous come to us and said, we heard what you're doing and we're so blessed by it, we're going to send over our landscape person to do some work for you, and that's on us. It's like something is happening, but it starts because Joe got out there and started digging himself and doing something. So how many of you will spend some time with your foundation, your capacity, and your impact? Let's do what we can. This song we're going to sing together and go into a time of meditative prayer. And it says, help me, Sarah. Even now I am able, even now I am free, even now I can feel the Spirit washing over me. Even now I can find the love in everyone I see. Even now I am free. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. Even now, for such a time as this. Time is a gift and time is an illusion. We often say, I'm not ready. I'll do it when, I'll do it if. It's not the right time, it's not the right setting. I don't yet have everything I need to do it the way I think I should be able to do it. And yet time is also your greatest gift, for whatever you cast into the present moment, you cast into all eternity. As you give in any moment from your heart, as you express generosity, as you extend the gesture of namaste, not even without, but within, as you take a moment to pause with that one that has irritated you, but yet you take the time to breathe and to look deep enough to see the light within them. It is not something that you are merely doing in that moment. It is something that you are casting into eternity. And it is expressing and flowing from not only the depths of your being, but throughout all being, throughout all creation. Now is the time. And you are the one, for you would not be here if it were not so. And so let the joy rise and let the sense of knowing that what you can do does matter. Look not to the left or to the right. Don't compare here or there. But go within. What brings you joy? What would you like to extend? What would you like to be able to express? Stretch yourself. The things that you long for, begin to give them in the most tiny seed way that you can possibly muster, and what you will come to discover is a flowering of that which you give. For as you give in any area, you increase your capacity to be a giver in that area. Don't hold back. Don't wait. Now is the time. And all that you do is cast into eternity. It is not void. And it does return unto you again and again and again. You really have got this. Because you're held in perfection and in love. It has you, and you have it. And all creation flows. So even now, especially now, know whatever you are doing matters. So let it count in the way that you would have yourself be known and be grown. Oh, even now I am able, even now I am free. Even now I can feel the Spirit washing over me. Even now I can find the love in everyone I see. Even now